So briefly, could you tell me a little bit about your career path and what led you to your current role?
So when I graduated from undergrad, I actually worked in politics and political consulting for a little while. And then I went back to school at Georgetown and I got a master's in public policy and an MBA. There was a dual program at the time. So it was 3 years. And, when I was doing my MBA, I took a finance course with Professor Pinkowitz. It was the first time I'd ever taken a finance course. And I really liked it and decided that was something that I wanted to spend more time doing. I got a summer internship at a local investment bank in the DC area that doesn't exist anymore. And then I joined Goldman Sachs in Los Angeles doing media M&A coming out of graduate school. And I did that for, 4 or 5 years. I actually briefly worked at Live Nation to help them with their merger with Ticketmaster. And then in 2009, I joined Morgan Stanley in their Chicago office. It was kind of a generalist office at the time. I'm still doing investment banking, and coming out of the financial crisis, they needed somebody to work on the Chrysler kind of restructuring. It was a complicated situation where the government owned a stake of it and Fiat owned a stake of it. And I spent about a year doing that. And coming out of that particular project, I had a lot more experience in automotive, and it was an area that there was a lot of opportunity in at the Morgan Stanley platform. And so I started covering the auto companies. I had a different lens because I had been doing media and telecom and in technology, and I hadn't done, a lot of auto before then. And so I sort of brought that different lens into my dialogue with my clients. And it happens to be at the same time, the auto industry started to face this inflection point related to how technology was influencing the evolution of that industry. So now I lead our global automotive and mobility technology practice. I've done a bunch of capital raises and M&A deals for some of the biggest names in that industry that you would have heard of. It's been really, exciting to be part of an industry that is facing such a significant transformation overall.
Thank you so much for sharing your background with us, Regina. We would still want to understand some of the most encouraging parts of your work, and what do you love the most?
Yeah, I think for me, the most interesting part of my job is giving clients advice. These are all really smart people who manage big businesses. And, so when they come to me with a problem, it's a thorny problem, right? And the fact that I have a perspective rooted in my experience that can help them solve that problem is really, I enjoy that, right? And I like thinking through creative ways to solve their problems. A lot of times they have different stakeholders that they need to try to manage, and understanding how they can get the capital they need to grow their business or put themselves in a position strategically to grow their business, and how they communicate, their ambitions to their different stakeholders. Those are all really interesting conundrums right now, because it's not like a clear glide path. And I really just love engaging with my clients and having them tell me, this is what I'm stuck trying to solve. Like, can you help me? And when I can come up with a solution and help them, get their objectives done, that to me is the part of the business that I like the most, and getting, with my clients and helping them, and that direct interaction is really fulfilling.
No, definitely. So in a broader scope, how do you think women can best help other women in the professional world? And what is something that we can do better at?
So there's lots of things that you can do. I don't want to say do better at, because I feel like we carry a lot of the load to help each other as it is. And I wish more men would carry some of the load. But I think that's actually where we can do the most is as women get to more senior positions in particular. I know there's this phrase about pulling other women up. I don't think it's that explicit. It's not like I identify other women that like I bring up with me. It's about actually like breaking the ground for other people and then helping ease the path, right? For them to come up behind you. So, for me, it's been a lot of, here is something that was an obstacle for me, I was able to overcome it. But that obstacle, I don't want that obstacle to be there for the next person. And so what can I do now that I've gotten past it to get rid of that obstacle? So I'm really vocal with my colleagues about, particularly those who are in positions of power, about, things we say, and parts of our culture that unintentionally make it more difficult for women, particularly, the general stuff like, she's quiet. Well, no, she's not quiet, right? Like, let's think about what you mean when you say that. Or the obstacles we have in terms of how women balance the different competing pressures they have, particularly when they have families. And, making sure that, you sort of, now that you have the credibility to be in the room with those senior folks, because you're one of them, are you helping them see maybe how they should be looking at the world a little bit differently? And that to me is the most important thing that I can do. And then also, spending time with women who are coming up behind and candidly just helping them know it's okay, right? I have 2 children, they're really young. I had my children a little bit later in life. So I had to do a lot of these, some of the challenges that happen when your children are really young and you're, on the road 4 days a week. That's difficult, right? And helping women feel better about the trade-offs that they make and helping them feel not alone, and also encouraging them to set boundaries with their job. It's okay to block off time every day to put the kids to bed. It's okay to block off time, if you don't have kids, every day to do something that is refreshing for you. I think sometimes we need to hear that, right? And so providing support in that way is the other thing that I spend time doing.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's really encouraging to see women leaders like you who have been in the industry for so long are, encouraging future leaders as well. What specific advice would you want to give to current students who would soon be entering the corporate world? And how can they start prepping up at business school right now?
Yeah, I think having a clear idea of what it is that's important in whatever company you're going to, is really critical, right? Different industries value different things, and the different companies within those industries value different things. And I would say that, maybe some of the missteps that I've made along the way have been kind of naively walking into an organization or a new group or a new situation and just assuming that this is how I had a view of the world and that's the way that they all had it, and not realizing that the priorities maybe were a little bit different on the edges. And because of that, I needed to adjust how I interacted with that set of people. And organizations, like, they have, we say culture, it's true, right? Organizations just have a way of doing things. And it's shaped by their priorities, and making sure that you really understand that when you walk in the door is going to give you a leg up in how you navigate sort of a new landscape.
That's definitely awesome advice for all students of all ages. How do you manage the grueling demands of work with family, kids, and your personal hobbies? How important is the balance of life of M&A, where work tends to be higher on the average?
Yeah, I don't think I have a balance. It's pretty awful. Listen, there's been times where it's been really intense and it's been really hard. And, I'm not going to lie, I've cried in an airport bathroom once or twice. It's not easy. I think that what works for me is I have a lot of support. So, I have a partner who's supportive, who's home with my children, when I'm on the road, because I do travel a lot. I have extra support around the house to help with them, with my kids. And so they feel lots of people love them. And then, they have been used to me working like this since they were born. And so in some ways, it's just part of their natural rhythm. But when I'm with them, I try to be very present for them. And I do try to explain what I'm doing. The pandemic was interesting because they really got to see, what I did. Mommy just didn't disappear. Mommy was right next to their bedroom. They like to bomb in my Zoom calls. But, I think the travel has been probably harder to make that for them for the adjustment. And listen, I don't think you can balance it. I really don't. And I think you just have to decide like where your limits are and what's most important to you. And so the one piece of advice I give to new moms who are in this industry is, figure out what's important to you. So for me, I really like to be there at bedtime. And so I try to block off bedtime, right? Even if it's 10 minutes, right? I try to be there to put them to bed. And, there might be specific events that I try to block off. And I try to carve out like specific time on the weekends that we do things. So I try to make sure that when I am, that I am really present for them and I make it a priority and they see that I'm making it a priority. But, it doesn't always work.
So in honor of Women's History Month, we would want to understand, as a woman, how did you find your supporters in the professional work life? And how did you find a mentor? And what were some of the challenges you faced to be where you are today?
Yeah, listen, I've had a couple of people along the way who believed in me, and those people made a difference in my life, right? And I think it's important to find out who those people are. I wouldn't necessarily call them mentors. I'd actually say they're sponsors. And I think that's an important distinction. But, there have been, and it's interesting, they're all men, but there have been a couple of folks along the way who I worked on them with a project. They appreciated my intellectual curiosity, my commitment, and they gave me guidance. And sometimes that guidance was not guidance I wanted to hear, right? But I actually think that that's been the most valuable advice I've given, right? Regina, you messed up there, right? This is what you should have done differently. And those people, listen, when I found them, I recognized them and I stayed close to them. Not so much in like, I'm your person, because that's not the way it works, but like, I made sure to maintain that relationship, to seek their guidance when I had a thorny problem. And to sort of really understand, where they could give me the best guidepost, if you will. And I wouldn't be where I am without some of those people. And I don't think anybody gets to be successful without people along the way who are willing to invest in them, like people invested in me. And so it's about recognizing when you find those people and investing back, right? And making them truly rich relationships. And then there have actually been some women along the way who weren't sort of like directly in my path, but who on the side, I could go to, I call it my tribe, right? And I have a bunch of them now who, we get together on a regular basis and talk about the challenges we face and how are we going to overcome them. And sometimes it's just sharing your frustrations, and that's a separate group, but also I want to say almost as important, to sort of helping you have perspective, because those people you don't have your dukes up with when you're talking to. And so sometimes they can give you some hard truths in a different way. Right. And having that support when you're working through challenging situations or environments, because that's what happens is you hit a point where you have to push through it to get to the next level. And it can be really hard, and making sure that there's somebody who's described what that path looks like and is there for you if you get there. And also sort of people supporting you along the way. That's what you need when you get to those moments.
No, definitely. And I definitely believe that candid advice is always useful, even though it might not be the easiest thing to hear in times. So I know we discussed the professional world as a whole, but what do you think is the biggest challenge for women that women face specifically in your industry? And what advice do you have for that within your everyday work life?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is that anytime you get to sort of these big power structures, and I think it's particularly true in sort of upper echelon finance, they're legacy institutions, right? Money has been, the center of a lot of these things for a long time. And that money for a long time was concentrated and is concentrated in sort of, powerful families or powerful institutions. And a lot of those people who sort of are gatekeepers for that world are men. And it's not nefarious, but the signals that you have to show that you belong, to be able to break into those circles, if you will, it's just harder, right? Like some of them you just can't do, right? Like you're not doing some of the same events. You have different life experiences. And so you have to find a different way to sort of penetrate those institutions. And because there are less people who look like you have done that, you have to figure it out. And there's not a good roadmap, right? And I think that's what's hard, is that you have to sort of innovate around it. Now, I would say that the fact that I had a harder path, and there's no doubt that I did, right, also meant that I had to develop some muscles around innovation and creativity that I wouldn't have if the roadmap had been clearer. And those have served me well. So like, there are moments where I get a little resentful about the fact that my path has been harder, but I recognize that, I don't believe in the whole, like everything makes you stronger thing, but I do recognize that I learned some skills along the way that now that I've gotten to this sort of upper echelon, makes me better at what I do. Right. And I think, recognizing what your strengths are in the fact that you are different, and how you use that rather than trying to replicate the paths of other people, is really important, because you'll never ever do it, right? Like I'll never be able to replicate what it took to be a great banker 40 years ago, right? And the industry's changed, but I have none of those qualities. And just accepting that, and accepting what it is that I do have, and creating a path on it has been really important. So I think one of the reasons that I have been successful is because I did focus, I started covering the auto industry, and I said, okay, I can't cover it the way everybody else did, because everybody else who covered it was, looked a specific way, and that wasn't me. And I covered it different. And it happens to be the way I covered it different is where the industry moved. And so my skill was particularly valuable. But you have to sort of innovate about how you're going to tackle some of the problems in your industry. And I think that's especially true in finance.
Wow, that was amazing to hear. And I really loved when you said that, taking up your stand and saying, hey, this is my specialty, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I would be, focusing on. And that makes a whole lot of a difference for women in the professional world at times, to take your stand. So constantly we see that M&A is growing at a higher pace in the past few years as it was traditionally. How do you see the roles that women will be playing in this growth in the next 5 years? And how do you think women can best help each other in this growth, and what can we be better at?
Yeah, listen, I expect that we'll continue to see M&A and capital markets activity, right? Companies need capital. It's interesting because there's been actually innovation in the M&A product, right? And I'll point to this back as a great example of this. And I'm gonna champion one of my colleagues, actually. So a good friend of mine, who's what I would describe as in my tribe that I talked about, she saw this. She's an M&A banker, and she saw this SPAC phenomenon, and she said, "Wait a minute, like this is untreaded waters, right? Like let's figure it out." And she figured out a plan, and she's like, "This is how we're going to tackle it." And she heads up our whole effort around that now, right? And it's because she said, "Wait a minute, here's something new. It's white space, and I can do this," right? And she did it, and she believed in herself. So the first thing is believe in yourself, and then other people believed in her to help her do it. And there's going to be a next wave that happens, right? Like there's the M&A and capital raises. They're not, they change all the time because they're driven by market conditions. And I actually think being creative about it and helping people do it is important. But I also think, to your question about like what we can do to help other people, like when she came to me and said, "What do you think?" I was like, "Do it." Right. And when I've had similar conundrums, she's like, "Do it." It's sometimes it's encouraging people and saying, "I believe in you. I know you can do this. It sounds like a great idea. Let me spend, let's spend an hour talking through how you're going to tackle it. And I'll let you spitball off of me and lay out a plan for how to do it, so that when you go talk to, the people that run that organization, you're equipped for it, right? It's helping people craft their strategy to get to the next level.
No, definitely. I always feel like sometimes the first jump is the hardest. So if you have someone backing you, that always makes a difference. So you've dropped a lot of amazing advice so far, but in the time we have remaining, do you have any additional advice or lessons learned to impart on women navigating through the business world?
Yeah. Listen, I would say the one thing I wish I had understood when I started doing this, that would have saved me a lot of angst, is not being naive about the fact that those challenges are there, right? I walked into this industry and I thought, if I work really, really hard and I do a great job, that's enough. And it's not. It's not. And some of the obstacles are real, and some of the obstacles are unfair. And when you get your chance to correct that, you should, and you shouldn't be shy about it. But I wish I had been less naive about the fact that those obstacles are real. I do think, that was, I don't know, I don't want to say how many years ago that was, but I do think people in general are more aware of sort of the more subtle structural obstacles that exist. But I would just say, keep your eyes wide open. It's not that people are nefarious about it. I mean, every once in a while they are, but it's just, they exist, and you're going to navigate them better if you spot them earlier. And so that's especially earlier in your career, you're so excited. You've just finished your business degree. You've learned all these really awesome things. You're ready to take, the tiger by the tail, and, you're going to run into something that's going to be really discouraging, and it's going to be less discouraging if you kind of anticipated it because you kept your eyes open. Right. So that would be my piece of advice. And also, don't be too hard on yourself. You're doing awesome wherever you are.
Thank you so much, Regina, for taking our time today and talking to us about your journey and how, as a woman in the industry, which can be so hard to, manage both work-life balance, how you have navigated. And it was really insightful to hear more about how we as a business students can do better and develop those skills to, before we enter the business world.